and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.
Hello, Philippines. This is Lecain with World News Jam. We bring you the most interesting stories from around the world each week. We just don't give you the news, but we tell you the story behind the news, as well as read and answer your questions in an entertaining and easy to understand way. So please join us on DZRJ 810 AM Radio Bandito TV and get yourself updated with all the interesting news of the week from around the world right here on DZRJ's World News Jam.
Watch and listen to World News Jam every Sunday from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. airing on Sky Cable Channel 224 and on all DTT boxes. Simulcasting online on Facebook and YouTube. Listen and watch on your mobile devices. Just search DZRJ Radio Bandido.
Hello, Philippines, and welcome to the World News Jam right here on DZRJ Radio Bandito and RJ TV Channel 224 on Sky Cable. My name is Lecain. We take a look at what I think are the week's most interesting stories. Check out what's going on outside the Philippines so you, the Filipino, can stay up to date. This week, the breaking news out of Russia. Will Trump be able to pay his massive judgments against him? Is the U.S. government really going to sue Apple? And what happened to Princess Kate? Also, updates on Haiti. Is the world going to help or not? And in our climate segment, it's so cold in Mongolia, the cows are dying. Of course, much more. So thank you for spending your Sunday evening with us. So let's get the jam started. You know, who is the king of mass shootings? No other country even comes close to the numbers of mass shootings in the U.S. For a while, the U.S. was logging one nearly every day. But this week, looks like Russia's trying to catch up some. Yesterday, men in camouflage, armed with automatic rifles, went into a concert hall and started shooting. First reports, there were 30 people dead. Then there were 60 dead, maybe 100 injured. But now the dust has settled. It seems like 133 people are confirmed dead, and many are injured. Russia is not immune to massive shootings. This is a somewhat reminder of the attacks that happened in Chechnya. It was 2002 when the 𝗪tože Theater in Moscow was attacked and 700 people were taken hostage. 129 of those were killed. Later in 2004, when a school was attacked in southern Russia and 334 died, half of them were school children. Also in 2007 and 2013, there was a suicide bombers that killed 34 people in the subway and the trolley bus stations. This latest incident seems at this point to have been ISIS. Now, there are multiple reports that the country of Ukraine was behind this. However, they have denied this. This is not really the Ukrainians' MO. They have never been known for doing attacks like this. And also, no real evidence. However, ISIS came out and claimed they did it. Now, when ISIS makes a big public statement like this, it's usually real. And this has the look of a ISIS terrorist attack all over it. The interesting thing is that the U.S. said they heard that an attack like this was going to happen in Moscow. On March 7th, the U.S. Embassy in Moscow warned all U.S. citizens in Russia to watch out for a possible attack in a large venue, including concerts. They also warned the Russian government that they had credible evidence that something was coming. Even though Russia is the U.S.'s enemy, it's kind of an unwritten agreement that countries will warn each other of impeding terrorist attacks. And it turns out the U.S. did indeed warn the Kremlin that ISIS militants were determined to target Russia in some way, and it came. In the concert, the band Picnic was about to take the stage, and it was about to start the show when just out of nowhere, 4 to 5 men dressed in camouflage burst into the concert. It was packed with people, started spraying the place with bullets from their automatic weapons. There were security guards. However, they did not have weapons, and most were shot at the very beginning. Then explosions went off and started a massive fire. This, of course, is another tactic of ISIS. Soon after the shooting, the men got away before the police could arrive. But after the shooting, a message appeared on a telegram saying it was ISIL, that's a subgroup of ISIS, that was responsible. ISIL stands for Islamic State of Iraq and Levant. ISIS, of course, standing for Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. Now, as the massive killing operation was ensuing, incendiary bombs were being set off, creating massive fires in the building. Rescuers tried to get people from the roof and from the basement, from the building that was burning. Finally, the roof gave way. Of course, there were stampedes when the attack started, sending people screaming to the doors. But the question remains, really, what happened to the attackers? According to the ISIS Post, the attackers were safe and back in their bases. However, Russia says they caught 4 suspects near the border of Ukraine, along with a couple other people, I think 11 in all. Putin came on the TV and said, with no evidence, that the Ukrainians had created a window for the terrorists to get out of Russia and into the Ukraine. Said the attackers were hiding at the border, waiting for that window that the Ukrainians had prepared for them. All of the attackers were not Russians. Now, like I said, the U.S. gave a warning that the terrorist group may soon attack. The Russians actually, the same week, had stopped an attack at a Moscow synagogue. But that was from ISIS-K, not ISIL or ISIS-L. ISIS-K, it's another subgroup of ISIS that has claimed multiple attacks against people in Afghanistan and Pakistan and Iran, Europe and Sri Lanka, even the Philippines. But the interesting thing is that this attack doesn't seem to have any connection at all to the war in Ukraine. It seems to be more associated with how the Russian government has been, according to them, mistreating Muslims. The statement released by ISIL talks about a raging war between the Islamic State and countries fighting Islam, one of which appears to be Russia. Now, I wanted to point this out, that a claim has also surfaced from ISIS-KP, or the Islamic State of Khorasan province, that they were somehow involved in the shooting. They were a part of the 2017 bombing in the St. Petersburg metro station that killed 15. Now, the president of the Ukraine has also spoken out in this incident, especially after Putin kind of pointed the finger at the Ukrainians. He said it was typical of Putin and other thugs to seek to divert the blame. In other words, saying that Putin was warned by the U.S. that the attack was coming, however, he chose to ignore it. And now, according to Zelensky, Russian officials were engaged in accusations against Kiev that the goals of stirring up anti-Ukrainian hysteria in Russian society and creating conditions to boost mobilization of Russian citizens and the criminal aggression against the Ukraine, yada, yada, yada. Now, it's true about the Russian official, even though Putin did not outright say that Ukraine was involved in the planning of the attack. The deputy chair of the State Duma Committee on International Affairs said the events were connected to the Ukraine. Now, currently the death toll is 133. However, there are many critical injured and some are not expected to survive, so that number will probably go up. There are multiple videos from cell phones that have been posted which show people hiding behind the seats and on the floor. Eyewitnesses saying that the gunman would go up to large groups of people and just shoot directly into the crowd. So there's going to be many questions coming out soon. First on my mind is, of course, with the war going on and terrorist attacks being warned about, how did these guys dressed in camouflage with backpacks filled with bombs and ammunition and machine guns in their hands get into a very modern concert house. I mean, there must have been some kind of security checking people for machine guns, right? The other problem is that if they were to find a connection between the Ukraine and this attack, and I'm not talking about the Ukrainian government, I mean, what if the ISIS group was using the Ukrainian country as a place to get in and out of Russia? That would give Putin all he needs in the way of propaganda to solidify his reasons for the continued attacks in Ukraine. And of course, if they don't find any evidence, they are probably just going to say it anyway. But it seems as if not only does the West hate Putin and his military machine, but also the Muslim world hates Russia, or at least factions of ISIS. Now, how will Putin spin this in his favor? He has just last week been voted in as president again. The second place finisher got somewhere around 3% of the vote. Saying Putin won in a landslide is an understatement. Putin gave a victory speech just after the election in which he said that his goal is to strengthen the Russian military. As people in the crowd yelled, "Putin, Putin, Putin." He also mentioned the death of 𝗪cie𝗪𝗏, the only real competition to Putin. He said it made no difference to the outcome of the votes. He also said that the whole world is laughing at what is happening in the U.S. He said that it's a disaster and it's not a democracy there. He even stood up for his buddy Donald Trump, saying that the government is using the judiciary to attack a candidate for president. In any case, Putin won the election by getting near 90% of the vote. Many have asked why they even had an election at all. Putin has imprisoned or killed anyone who runs against him, but the Kremlin supposedly needed this election to go forward to show most Russians support Putin. There were some isolated incidences. People set fire to voting booths, pouring ink in the voting boxes, ruining the ballots, but not many problems. The Russian news said only around 74 people were arrested. In case the future is still undetermined, the U.S. is about to have an election and will most likely determine the fate of the Ukrainians. Currently, the Trump supporters in the U.S. Congress are trying to block support to the Ukraine. And if Trump were to win the election, Ukraine would be handed over to Russia probably within months, if not weeks, if not days. But Russia has other enemies beside the Ukraine and the West. As of now, it has ISIS and ISIL and ISKP. And their guys are the enemy of everyone. The world is a dangerous place. And this is Eric Lecain on the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio Bandito. Thank you for joining us here on Sunday. How do you know if you're rich? This is something I have come across a lot here in the Philippines. People who talk to me about how rich they are. I mean, it used to be that all you needed to do was have an iPhone or drink coffee at Starbucks, and you were of the rich elite class. Sometimes I come across those who go on and on about what they own, their swimming pool, their big house, and their drivers and maids. But are they rich? Are they just pretending to be rich? I know a guy who lives in a 90 million peso house. You know how I know it's a 90 million peso house? Because he tells me every time I go in it. And he's got cars and a giant TV and, of course, the driver and a maid. All the stuff to make you rich. So I was helping him with some legal issues, and I realized that that house, well, it's got a bank mortgage for about half and then private loans on the other half. Every one of his cars has a loan on it. Even the giant TV needs 2 years of payments. He really had no savings to speak of. One time I spoke to his driver. He's a very nice man. He's worked very hard in his life. He owns his own home, owns 2 cars, has a credit card with zero balance, and has savings. So the question is, who's the rich man here? The man who boasts about how rich he is, but really is worth zero? Or the man who drives the car, on paper, is worth more than the first guy? And when you look at them, it seems obvious who's rich, but in reality, who's really worth more? I'm sure most of you know where I'm going with this. Donald Trump has told us for years about how rich he is, that he's a billionaire, that he's the perfect person to be president because he doesn't need anyone else's money. But this week, it seems that, well, it's no longer the case. The lawsuit Trump lost against the state of New York for overvaluing his properties to get a loan and then undervaluing his same properties to pay less taxes now owes $454 million. Now, for a billionaire, that's nothing. Elon Musk could pull that out of the back of one of his new electric trucks, if it worked. But it looks like Trump doesn't have the cash. And the problem is the bill is due tomorrow, Monday. Trump lost the trial, and as every law expert said he would, the amount levied in the trial against him for defrauding the banks in the state of New York was total, with the interest, $454 million and counting. Now, Trump has appealed the amount. However, in New York, you must put up the money in order to appeal. Then if you win the appeal, you get it back. But if you lose, all that money goes to the court, plus the interest over the time of the appeal. They make it very expensive to appeal in New York. This stops everyone from just appealing because they don't like the verdict. Now, the thing is, Trump most likely will lose the appeal. However, he can appeal again after that if he doesn't like the outcome. But remember, interest is being added every day on $454 million. Now, most people don't have the liquid assets to put up big money like this to make an appeal. So in general, most people will put up a bond for the judgment. Say you owe the court, $10,000. And like most of us, we don't have that. So you get a bond company that puts up the money for you. They will pay the court $10,000, plus you pay them a $200 fee when you pay them back the $10,000. But you're going to need to put up your house as collateral, in case you lose and then you can't pay the money. Last week, we talked about Trump putting up a $90 million bond in the sexual assault defamation trial that he lost recently. An insurance company put up that bond, but Trump had to put up collateral. But with this latest bond, Trump asked 30 different companies and they all said no. No one would give Trump the loan because he doesn't have the collateral to back it up. And Trump has a long history for not paying his loans back, especially when it comes to banks. Now, you might think that Trump has a lot of properties and that he can use those as collateral. However, like what we talked about before, most of those properties already have loans on them. A loan company doesn't want to take another place on collateral that already has a loan on it, because what if Trump doesn't have the money to pay back the loan? Who gets the property? It gets very complicated. No one is willing to take the risk on Trump because even though he's known as a billionaire, constantly tells everyone he is a billionaire, in reality, he may not really have anywhere near as much money as he says. Then comes the other issue. What are the actual values of his properties? He was just found guilty of overinflating the price of them. So no one wants to touch him with this kind of amount. He has a history of borrowing money then he declares bankruptcy. And all those bankruptcies he declared before, they were from casinos. Who loses money in the casino business? I mean, people are coming in there to gamble in games in which are designed to lose. Now, according to the courts, if Trump doesn't pay by tomorrow, the state will start seizing his assets. The prosecutors already said as soon as next week, they will start proceedings with the court to begin taking properties. But Trump does have a way out of this. He could borrow money from one of his foreign friends if he can convince them that he could win the presidency. If, say, I don't know, the president of Russia or China or North Korea were to loan the president of the U.S. that kind of money. The problem is, how would Trump be able to explain that? His whole persona is that he is so rich, he doesn't need anyone else's money, so he's not beholden to anyone. When Trump's lawyer was asked this question, if he could take a loan from, say, a Russian president or the Chinese president, she just skirted around the question very nervously. Then there was a possibility of Trump selling his Twitter company called Truth Social. As we talked about this before, there's a company that wants to buy it, take it public. But this is a very tricky way of doing it, because Trump would not get cash for his company, but instead would get shares that would have a lockup period. So he could not sell them for at least probably 6 months. Another possibility is that Trump could ask his followers. They seem to love to give him money. Well, actually, Trump already sent out a huge email blast asking his followers to send him any amount. He put his daughter-in-law as head of the Republican National Committee, and she's fixing things so that any money that comes into the RNC is portioned off to help pay for Trump's legal bills. This is according to her. So as for now, Trump will take money from anyone that will give it to him. Banks, lenders, foreign governments, even you. But in the end, as we can see, looking rich and being rich are very different. The problem is, when you have a civil judgment against you in court, then we really get to see the difference between the two. Just this past Friday, Trump came out and said money's not a problem, that he has $500 million in cash if he needs it. This comes just after his lawyers were in court saying Trump doesn't have the money, not only to pay the court, but also to get a bond. This contradiction is going to become an issue next week when Trump's lawyers go to the appellate court asking them to lower the amount because it's an impossibility for Trump to pay the amount. The court might say, well, hey, he just was bragging about having $500 million. Why don't you just use that money? I mean, why would 30 lending companies refuse to take on Trump's bond if he has that much cash? I mean, sometimes it feels good to say you're worth all this money until someone says, okay, let's see it. Many people are saying that Trump should just declare personal bankruptcy. That would get him out of a lot of this jam, but it would also force Trump to, well, tell us he lied, that he's not a billionaire. Neither is not the billionaire that he told us he was. He's just a guy with a lot of stuff that's all out on loan. And the problem with doing that, well, can you win a presidency when you have to tell everyone you're a fraud? This is Eric Lecain on the World News Jam on RJTV. Kate Middleton. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Kate Middleton. Now, if any of you out there don't know who Kate Middleton is, she's also known as Princess Kate. Her husband, William, is the next in line to be King of England. Now, very much like Princess Diana, Kate is very well liked by the public. She does a lot of charity work and gives out a lot of money. But also, like Diana, she's constantly hounded by the press. The tabloids are all over her, trying to get the latest scoop. Now, back in January, Kate had to get abdominal surgery, of which went just fine. However, afterwards, she decided to take some time off from public appearances. Well, the press went crazy. Where is Kate Middleton? Where did she go? What is she doing? There were speculations that she was getting a divorce from William. All kinds of analyzations about her moods and body language in previous videos of her standing with William. But then it came out that she had died, and the royal family was trying to cover it up. That there were fake Kates walking around to throw off the press. But then the story leaked after that she was dead, that maybe King Charles had died. That this was the secret to keep. This led to all kinds of other theories that, of course, then came to the picture that everybody saw. Many people were speculating about what happened to Kate. So she released a photo of herself just to say, I'm okay with her and her kids being happy, the good royals. But the problem was, it was photoshopped. The hands didn't match up correctly, and yada, yada, yada. The major news agency pulled it because they said it's a fake picture. More conspiracies began to emerge, so Kate issued an apology about the picture. But the firestorm had already started. All kinds of ideas and criticisms of her were coming out. But then this week, Kate made a video and released it. Turns out that after the surgery, they realized that she has cancer cells in her body. So all this time that she had disappeared, she was actually getting chemotherapy treatments. So you would think this would be met with compassion and empathy. However, some are actually quite mad at Kate. Why didn't she tell us sooner? Why are all the royals always lying and trying to cover up the truth? To which I say, geez. Do we need to know everything about the royals? I mean, even though we have been all in her business, she was quite nice about it and thanked people for their concern about her. I personally hope that she will be okay. Maybe now we can get back to the truly important stories, like our Prince Harry and Meghan sleeping in separate beds. And this is Eric Lecain on DZRJ Radio and RJTV. Everybody loves the iPhone. I have an iPhone. All my friends have iPhones. When someone says they have an Android, we iPhone people go, oh, sorry, I can't be your friend. You don't have an iPhone. So either you have an iPhone or you don't. There's either iOS or there's the other one. But what's interesting is that maybe there'd be a lot of other things on the market if it wasn't for the iPhone, or most importantly, the Apple company. I mean, what if you wanted to make a piece of software to do something that everyone needs, but Apple won't allow it on their App Store because there is another software that does the same thing, maybe not as good as yours, but Apple has a financial interest in that software. I mean, what if someone had a great app that works on both platforms, but works better on the Android phone? What if Apple treated text messages from Androids differently from their iPhones? Which, by the way, it does. So the U.S. government has decided to sue Apple for abuse of its control over the App Store, the place where you can go and get software for your iPhone. This is not that far from what the U.S. government went after with Microsoft. They controlled Windows, the most used operating system in the world. If someone made a, better, say, word processor than Microsoft Word, well, they would change their operating system so that it would be incompatible with their new software, drive them out of business. They would buy up stock of companies and then they would just disappear them. They made their software so easy to copy, then they would go into companies and threaten to sue unless they paid for every single license. Or you could just sign an agreement saying you will only use Microsoft products. This is until the U.S. government stepped in and stopped them. Well, the government has finally told Apple, enough already. You can't do this anymore. Antitrust officials said antitrust laws and the court's interpretation of them suggest that you're a monopolist. He said if you do engage in behaviors that have no legitimate business justification other than to limit competition and cement your monopoly, then that is problematic. And there's the problem. When a company is too big, is it when your company is worth $3 trillion? Is it when they completely control the market, only allow companies to participate who they deem are beneficial to them? And now that the public is hooked on Apple, how do we judge what the price should be? Apple keeps raising its prices, really sticking it to the consumer. Maybe much higher than you can pay, but you have no choice now. We're at the point where you can't live without certain things in your life. And a smartphone is one of those things. So we have to pay for whatever they say, whether you like it or not. And the U.S. government is not the only one that notices this. Last month, Apple was fined 1.8 billion euros by the EU that said that Apple had broken its antitrust laws. They said Apple had prevented streaming services from informing users of payment options outside the Apple App Store, that you can use the services cheaper by just not going to the App Store, that Apple had abused its dominant position in the market for decades and ordered the tech giant to remove all these restrictions. And Apple, being who they are, said it will appeal. But back in the U.S., a business law professor said, it's about time that the Department of Justice did something about Apple. He said it's not just about the 30% Apple Store fee, but it's about the core of unfair practices of Apple. Apple systematically excludes rivals from the Apple ecosystem. By doing that, Apple is hurting so many startup businesses, stakeholders, customers, and in my opinion, shareholders. Right now, Apple has used its power to make it that when you are texting a friend who's on an Android, any pictures or videos they send you are purposefully going to be grainy and pixelated, very low quality. And the conversation will not be encrypted. The general thought is that, well, you know, Android phones, they're just much lower quality than iPhones. But that's not true. Apple's just manipulating the texting software to appear that way. But says they haven't done anything wrong, that if the government is successful, it will mean the government can now decide what can and can't be on your phone. The DOJ, of course, doesn't see it that way. They believe that if you can get Apple to follow the rules set by the antitrust laws, that it will be better for consumers and lower the price. I mean, they claim it cost them $442 USD to make an iPhone 15, I believe. Then they sell it for $899. They make more than 100% on each iPhone. Now, I know that's an oversimplification, but now you start to see why they are the second most expensive company in the world. Apple made it so people are hooked on the iPhone and won't switch to cheaper brands because they are the idea that they can't do what they need to do on another brand. This is where the U.S. suit gets its footing, saying Apple has created an uneven playing field by making its own software work with the core features and denying everyone else access to those features. If you have the only products that can do these things, you are clearly designing it so that no one else can utilize any of the features on the device. The U.S. government says that is illegal. So if you make your iPhone only compatible with Apple laptops, it means that you only can buy Apple products because they're the only ones that are compatible. Apple says this makes them more secure, but Apple developers and rival device makers say that Apple is using its power to crush the competition. Also, Apple is not the only one of the U.S. government has gone after. Same thing with Google and Amazon and Meta, Facebook, whatever. So is the U.S. government helping or hurting its consumers? Or is Apple stifling progress in the tech world? It's true what the government is saying here. If you buy an iPhone, you kind of need to buy an Apple Watch and an iPad and an iBook. And then you get your attitude that your phone is better than your neighbor's. But then your neighbor probably spent half the money that you did. This is the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio Bandito. My name is Eric Lecain. You know, last week we talked about the problems going on in Haiti. The president just resigned, which has left who in charge? Who's actually running the country? Is it the government or is it the gangs at the government who allowed these gangs to run things so they themselves could stay in the office? Of course, we now know that these gangs have simply taken over the streets of Haiti, and currently violence is running the show. It's now not uncommon to see a body wrapped in wire on its knees, slumped over and burned to death. It's complete anarchy there. Everyone wants to leave, but how can you? The gangs have put up roadblocks, which means that if you try and drive out of the city, you will probably take your life into your own hands. The only way it seems to get out of Haiti is by helicopter. But then, you try to see these people landing helicopters and rush. Once they land the helicopters, the gangs will rush to where those helicopters are. Sometimes they will confiscate the helicopter, destroy the helicopter before it can leave. So for 3 weeks now, Haiti has been trapped in a war with itself. It was before, remember, they had random kidnappings and killings, but now it's much worse than that. Right now, people are taking matters into their own hands. Just regular, normal people have started going after gang members, killing them themselves. The idea being it's better to kill them than to be killed. But when did this really get to this point? The world was saying, don't worry, Haiti, we will help you. The prime minister said 18 months ago that he had requested foreign military assistance. And 6 months ago, they passed the United Nations Security Council authorized a military support mission with the backing of the United States. Then 2 months ago, the foreign minister of the Dominican Republic warned the UN that Haiti is on the edge of a precipice. But what has the world actually done for Haiti? Not much, honestly. Since the prime minister had resigned, he can't even land on a plane in Haiti for fear of being shot. Nothing has really happened. Nothing except the fact that the gangs now control 80% of the capital city. The transitional government has still not been named, and yet no one is really sure when that will even come. Much of the Haitian state has disintegrated. Its courts are occupied by the gangs. Its prisons are left open. The prime minister effectively exiled, with the country's finance minister acting as the role of president. Haiti's Minister of Communications building is itself overrun by refugees fleeing gang attacks. In its front office, hungry children now sit on the floor and swing on rolling desk chairs. Haiti's national police may be only fully functional state institution left, but they are under-equipped and overstretched, they say. Everyday police respond to gang attacks, beating them back in gun battles that echo throughout the city, only to be pulled to a new neighborhood the next day, while the gangs reclaim the hard-won territory that they just had the day before. The police say that they are ready to work with the international peacekeepers or anybody that will help them support what they are doing. But where are they? So far, the Kenyan force we talked about last week is still not there, and the others from Jamaica and Benin and Bahamas and Barbados and Chad, they are not there either. Besides stopping the violence, there are issues of opening the airports, so bringing in clean drinking water, food. But currently the gangs are controlling the airport, so nothing goes in, nothing goes out. There's no talk of bringing in bounty hunters. They're thinking about doing this, bringing in bounty hunters to go after the gang leaders, dead or alive. Which, by the way, the major, I heard about this, the major gang leader was killed on Thursday in a gunfight. But the Haitians are now of the mindset to just let the gangs have a seat at the political table. They are losing all hope in the international community helping them. In their eyes, they have gained their independence in 1804 by overthrowing the French, only to be shunned by the international community for many years. Many who never wanted the UN to come back and rule them are now thinking, all right, that's the only avenue we have left. The ambassador of Haiti said in Paris this week that Haiti has nowhere else to turn in this bloody nightmare. From the depths of the hole where we find ourselves, we see the hands of those who pushed us here. These hands which could still, if they wanted, extend a pole to us. A woman from Haiti spoke to a reporter and said, so many people have died now. Their bodies have been picked up on the street so many times. We should pray to God to speak to the Americans, ask them for help. But for some reason, missions coming from the multinational missions seem far off. So far off, all the Americans have done is provide a few flights for American citizens trying to leave the city. The only other flights that can be accessed via helicopter and are only for people who can afford them. So as the diplomats and the statesmen sit at their tables trying to decide what's in the best interest for this country, every day, every minute, the country crumbles a little bit more. That Haitian woman on the street that I was quoting before also said something I can't forget. Are we going to die? If you know, you should tell me. I guess the answer to that question is, I don't know. And this is the World News Jam. Look at us on Facebook Live, on DZRJ Radio, right now here in Makati. Where do cows go when it gets cold? Now, when I was a kid, when it was cold, the cows just kind of stood outside in the cold. They all huddled together and just sort of breathed on each other. But of course, that was North Carolina, United States, where I grew up. And it was cold, but not cold like we see now. Now we see cold stretches like we've never seen before in history. There's a lot of stories on the news about record-breaking cold, freezing temperatures, Arctic blasts. So what about the cows? How cold can a cow be? Well, obviously, not that cold. In Mongolia, they have been having winters beyond what even they can tolerate. It's a messy cycle there when the summers produce little rain and then the winters are beyond cold. This means that the livestock are weak and malnourished when the winter finally arrives. It's a phenomenon called 𝗪់. This year, something like 70% of the herd has died because of this problem. That's nearing 5 million animals have died due to freezing to death. This has a huge effect on Mongolians' nomadic herding communities. About 2,250 herder families rely on these animals for their livelihoods. They estimate around 1 million herders depend on their 65 million domesticated animals for meat, milk, animal dung, which is used to burn. Also income from selling hides, wool, cashmere. This loss of animals to the cold has pushed thousands of Mongolians into poverty, making it hard for the humans to get through the winter. And once one source of income drives up, it starts a ripple effect that causes other problems. Without income, there's not enough to buy animal food, which is putting the animals that could survive the winter now at risk of starving. Fellas, lack of medical supplies, not to mention food for people. The UN has attempted to step in and deliver animal food. However, the scope of the disaster is so large that this is quickly turning into a major humanitarian disaster, not just for a bunch of cows freezing to death. And the thing is, it's happening more and more frequently. The 𝗪̀ phenomenon has been directly linked to climate change, as this would only happen once in a decade, and it started to happen nearly every year. So, there needs to be a change in the lifestyle of the Northern Asian people in order to cope with the changing climate. And this is something the Mongolians have yet to figure out. They tried to prepare this year, but it's supposed to be spring coming now. However, there's still snow on the ground. It's very confusing, not only for the animals, but to the people. The nomadic herders usually move with the seasons. They walk and move with the animals every year as the seasons change. They have been doing this the same way for generations. However, now they are at a loss to try and figure out what to do and where to go and when. Last summer had a good rain, but then the temperature dropped. Then they had snow in November. But then the temperature rose just before a series of weeks where it was negative 40 degrees centigrade below zero. There's something called dual white and iron 𝗪̀. This means that very deep snow is preventing the animals from reaching the grass, combined with a hard freeze that locks pasture lands into ice. The 𝗪s are becoming so frequent that herders don't even have time to recover in between bouts of these weather patterns. This is how climate change is throwing off the usual schedule of the seasons. Mongolia is one of these places that doesn't produce climate-changing carbon, such as places like mainland China. However, they are taking the brunt of the increase in heat, which, as we know now, creates these super long cold spells. This is a big issue if you are a nomadic tribe that moves with the seasons. What do you do with your animals if the seasons just don't work right anymore? I guess we are always worried about what climate change is doing for us, what it's doing to us. Sometimes we forget what it might be doing to the cows. This is Lecain on the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJ TV here in Manila, Philippines. Thank you so much for joining us this Sunday. Talk about interesting stories around the world. You know, every year here on the show, we wait for this report to come out on the happiest countries in the world. Well, it's out this week, and no surprise, the winner again is Finland. According to the annual report that marks the United Nations International Day of Happiness, March 20th. By the way, did you feel happy on March 20th? Honestly, I don't remember if I was happy on the 20th or the 21st or the 22nd, but there's one place that is always happy, and that's Finland. Some people believe it's the cooler temperatures of Finland that make it so happy. Also, the northern lights and the summer sun, which sometimes is 24 hours a day. Supposedly in Finland, if you drop your wallet, it will be returned to you. And people help each other every day, day in, day out. They have a very high quality of education, health care. It's totally paid for. Well, that would make me happy. But this means basically everyone starts out on equal footing. Also, immigrants are very welcome, and they are, for the most part, very happy to be there because the people there are very welcoming. In other countries where they shun immigrants, in Finland, they are like, welcome. Come live with us in the freezing cold. So it's kind of easy to see why everyone is so happy there. But really, how does this report judge how happy a country is? Are they just smiling a lot, like in the Philippines? Or are they really happy? What the report does is it looks at 6 categories. What's the gross domestic product per person, social support, life expectancy, freedom, generosity, and how much people think the government is corrupt. What's interesting is the countries that are also in the top 10. Denmark's number 2, Iceland number 3, Sweden number 4, Netherlands number 6, Norway number 7, and Switzerland number 9. Places that are cold and dark are the happiest places to be. I wonder why that is. Is the heat somehow associated with unhappiness? Does a hot cup of tea make one happier than a nice cold glass of iced tea? And what about other countries? Where does the U.S. fall? I mean, there's a country where you can make good money. You can live in a nice house where food will never be a problem. You get free money just when you're 65. Well, they are number 23. The problem there is, even though they are the wealthiest country, young people under 30 are very, very unhappy with their lives. In fact, for people under 30, the U.S. is ranked 62 in the world. You can't tell me that technology and scrolling on a smartphone doesn't have something to do with that. Another interesting part of this study is where Asian countries are in the happy ranking. China, for instance, is number 60. Japan is number 51. Korea number 52, with Indonesia coming in at 80. Vietnam at 54. Thailand at 58. And where is the Philippines? Well, it's right there in the middle at 53. So, Filipinos, you're about half happy. But the weirdest one is Israel. It came in ranked at number 5. I mean, isn't there a war going on in Israel right now? But according to the study, the war had little to do with where the study came in the rankings. Also, it's based on a 3-year average, and the war was just recently. But in general, according to them, Israel is very happy. However, even though they're the country, the Palestinian region there was ranked 103. And this ranking was done before the war started. I mean, whether they are happy in Israel or not, half the country is clearly hates the other half. So if you are asked who is the least happiest, Well, Afghanistan. I mean, who couldn't see that one coming? I mean, I pretty much understand that one, especially if you're a woman. So, are you happy? It's funny, this week I asked a few people around here in general if they are happy. And in general, they are not, especially in Manila. But all the people I asked outside the big cities, the ones that are living in the province, 100% of them said they are pretty happy. So, you think this means that money and possessions aren't what really makes us happy? Does having an iPhone, going to Starbucks make you happy? Maybe just a mango and a bowl of rice and sitting around the hut with friends and family is enough. I can't say I don't disagree with that. This is Eric Lecain on the World News Jam on DZRJ's Radio Bandito and RJTV Channel 224 Sky Cable, thanking you for joining us this Sunday evening. Please leave a comment on the DZRJ Facebook page about any of the stories that you have heard on the show tonight. We will read them, discuss them on next week's show. So for now, for all of us here at DZRJ and RJTV, please join us again next week on the World News Jam with me, Eric Lecain. Please be safe out there, and we will see you next week.
The views and comments